Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to the Too Fit Podcast, hosted by the Too Fit guys, Jake and Josh. Now, Too Fit, by definition, is actively pursuing a state of health and well-being beyond perceived limitations. So, if you're looking to push the boundaries of performance mentally, physically, and everywhere in between, then you have come to the right place. On the Too Fit Podcast, we will be interviewing and having fireside chats with renowned experts from doctors and strength and conditioning coaches to athletes and entrepreneurs. Our goal is to extract tools and tricks of the trade that you can implement whether you're a world-class athlete, weekend warrior, entrepreneur, or grinding out the 8 to 5, all in order to assist you on your journey to becoming Too Fit. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Too Fit Podcast. And I have a question for you. Have you ever wondered what professional athletes did for workouts during the season, off season, what their sharpening carts look like, what they did for longevity and performance, and what kind of access or technology they use to heal their bodies, make them stronger, recover faster? Well, today we get to pick the brain of a man who can take you behind the scenes. And he is the head strength and conditioning coach of one of the most storied franchises in professional sports history. That is the 16-time NBA champion Los Angeles Lakers. And today we have their head strength and conditioning coach, Tim DiFrancesco, on the show. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. This will be fun.
Heck yeah. Well, Tim, we've been looking forward to this for a while. So yeah, I know. This is a busy
Likewise.
Man. We had to book this way in advance. So.
Yeah, it could be tricky with all the travel and whatnot during the course of the season. But unfortunately, now we're out early while the playoffs are started. It gives us a chance to do this podcast. So there's a silver lining in everything, right?
Oh man, absolutely. Yeah, we'll start to hear that, but we're glad you're here. We're glad we get to sit down with you, pick your brain a little
bit.
So.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, guys.
Selfishly, we'll take it. Yeah.
That's right.
So for people who don't know, give a little bit of your background, just kind of how does one go from where you started to personal training, PT, to now the head strength and conditioning coach of the dynasty, the LA Lakers?
Yeah. I think if you boil it all down, and if I really hold my own feet to the fire and say, well, how the heck did I get here? It probably, it all stems from a passion and a drive to solve problems. So I guess I've had that instinct and that curiosity and that drive to figure out how to solve problems when they're in front of me from as early back as I can remember. And then you combine that with the typical young kid who loves athletics and loves to compete. And I was faced with a problem, which was I was short, I was slow, and I couldn't really jump, but I had to figure out how to compete and how to play sports as long as I could competitively. And so I guess, that really becomes the story of what led up to me getting here and solving that problem for myself, trying to figure out how am I going to make it to the pros. And so I never really put on a jersey at the pro level, but I did end up making it to the pros via figuring out that problem for myself as long as I could, and then ultimately turning that into leaving no stone unturned in how do you solve that problem for the pros that do make it, and not only that, but humans in general. And I always go back to this thing where I believe in it very strongly, which is, every human is an athlete and every athlete is a human. So, that's sort of what drove me. And along the way, what the steps that I took there was, well, what in my toolbox do I need to be able to help humans enhance their performance ecosystem the most and to the utmost of my ability. So my first step curriculum-wise along the way was undergrad in athletic training, Endicott College outside of Boston. From there, I went directly into PT school at UMass Lowell, and so got my doctorate in physical therapy. And then from there, really took those two backgrounds and dove full head of steam, full bore into the performance and strength and conditioning world. For me, I felt like that was my greatest hammer in terms of being able to affect change in that performance ecosystem for whatever person I was fortunate enough to be able to be working with. So I worked as a physical therapist outside of Boston at a traditional sports medicine clinic for about 3 years out of PT school, and was also on the side really developing my time in the trenches of the strength and conditioning performance world in a small scale way as I was developing TD Athlete's Edge, which was my platform, and I have two partners that have worked with me from day one on that. My brother Scott DiFrancesco and Jed Sturman, who we grew up together trying to solve these problems together, and so TD Athlete's Edge began to develop at the same time as I was working as a physical therapist, and we were working with people outside of Boston in a small space and doing big things though, and really loving that opportunity to do that. And around 3 years into doing both of those things simultaneously, I had an opportunity to take a job with the Bakersfield Jam, an NBA D-League team in Bakersfield, California. And it was really exciting for me because I had explored a lot of different opportunities or venues within the sports medicine, rehab, and performance world of more of a private setting, but had not really spent a lot of time in the team setting. So I jumped on the opportunity to pack up and go to Bakersfield, California, and I worked for the Bakersfield Gym as a head athletic trainer and strength and conditioning coach for 2 seasons. Before I then had realized I was basically put myself in the right place at the right time, doing the right things, where we became affiliated with the Lakers in Bakersfield, and I had some interaction with their staff and the legendary Gary Vitti, head athletic trainer of the Lakers for 30 plus years. And yeah, I mean, it translated into they were looking for a person to run their weight room with a perspective of movement assessment, movement quality, awareness, and translating that into strength and conditioning and performance. And I had put those skill sets into my toolbox, and the next thing I knew, it was I was the head strength and conditioning coach for the Los Angeles Lakers. So there's the maybe not so quick, but the quickest version of how I got here today that I can get you.
That's a great overview. Tim, you mentioned kind of early on there you were trying to solve these problems. Would you mind kind of going into and listing what some of these problems were? And also you mentioned this performance ecosystem. Would you kind of define that for folks?
Yeah. So first, these problems, I mean, it can be debilitating. It can be overwhelming and frustrating for a young athlete who is trying to learn the movement skills, the fine motor skills, and just the ins and outs of being an athlete, and you're just sort of thrown out there like, okay, figure it out, score a goal, make a basket, you get a rebound, and so every young athlete starts with at a different developmental stage, and physically and everything else. And so, I mean, whatever it is, I think that that every young athlete can sit down and list a few areas where they're like, well, I need to improve in this area, whether it's I need to get more speed, I need to improve my jump shot, I need to be able to jump higher, I need to just not get injured every other game, whatever it is. So I think I was faced with lots of those, if not all of those problems. And I think a lot of athletes can say at least one of those is something where it's if for them to continue to advance and do the thing that they love, perform at a high level, that they've faced one of those problems. So those are fascinating to me. Those are that solving those problems is part of the deal. Like, no athlete should go into it being like, well, what's wrong with me? I don't have it all figured out. Of course you don't. And we all have all different physical histories and backgrounds and all that stuff that led up to you stepping on the field. So there's no way everybody just steps on and is perfectly ready to go. And so, yeah, that whole problem set it drives my passion to be able to help people, because what's better than being able to put it all together and go out on the field and perform and compete at a high level and walk away knowing that you didn't leave any stone unturned of that performance ecosystem. So there's the second part of your question. And to me, that's like everything. That's mind, body, soul, the whole deal. And what goes into that is not just getting reps in the gym. That's a tiny little piece. It's what foods are you putting in regularly? What are you doing for sleep? What are you doing for recovery? What are you doing to develop and maintain a really focused and calm mind, because you need that when you're out there on the field. And so that is that's what I'm referring to when I say that performance ecosystem. It's everything under the umbrella that allows a human to be an athlete and an athlete to be a human.
Man, well said. So I know a lot of people get into PT thinking that they're going to be working with athletes and they want to, but a lot of PT I think is, kind of the stigma is helping grandma out after her fall, her broken hip. And I've heard some horror stories about, some PTs helping grandma up off the chair and ends up wetting their new pair of Dockers and other things. But so it's not exactly the life that they were planning, but it sounds like was TD Athletes Edge kind of your segue out of that to working with athletes, or were you always working with athletes?
Yeah, no, it definitely was. I mean, going in PT school, you have an opportunity to explore all the different settings that exist in the rehab and physical therapy world. So I spent time in neuro settings. I spent time in pediatric settings. I spent time in geriatric settings. To be really honest with you, I look back on experiences and time in each of those settings and am extremely thankful that I had that opportunity to get valuable time and look back on just some of the really rewarding aspects of those settings. And that being said, there was just always this youth athlete scratching and clawing somewhere inside of me saying, let's figure out the athletic ecosystem performance puzzle. And so there's a ton of things that I actually take away from those rehab-based settings, geriatric, pediatric, neuro-based settings that I now use in the athletic when I'm training, higher level athletes. And so I think that was extremely valuable, extremely necessary for me to have. And I just realized pretty early on that for me to honestly say I put my hat on and I go to work in the area of direct passion and drive, for me, it probably has to be including, not only, but including working with higher level athletes and helping that young athlete solve the puzzle of the performance ecosystem.
Tim, what was your first day like on scene as the head strength and conditioning coach of the Lakers? Were you like, I'm coming in with a plan? I'm going to come in slow. I'm going to kind of meet everyone, evaluate. I mean, what was that day like?
So I walk in, and one of the first people I come across is Kobe Bryant, and a couple people have heard of him probably. So I'm like just shaking in my boots, but trying not to show it, right? And I go up to him with my hand extended, about to say some professional and very calculated. It's an honor to meet you, and I'm looking forward to doing great things with you type of fluff statement. And he slaps my hand out of the way, brings me in for a huge hug, and is like, "Get the hell out of here with that stuffy clinic-based stuff. Welcome to the team." And so, for a guy like that to welcome me in a way like that, it quickly brought me down to earth and got me to where I needed to be, and immediately away from that fan in me to okay, I'm here to do work, and they're welcoming me in with my skill sets to do that. So it was I won't forget that.
What's it like having that responsibility of knowing that guys like Kobe and Jeremy Lin, Steve Nash, that their well-being is basically in your hands?
Yeah, there's no way around it. You're going to sense this level of pressure and focus that's necessary to do that. I do think that along my stops, I did my best. I did my absolute damnedest to make sure that before I ever had an opportunity to work with a guy like Pau Gasol, Kobe Bryant, etc., I always treated each person I was working with as if I was working with Kobe Bryant. And whether I succeeded in that every single time I worked with someone, I don't know, but I tried as hard as I could to do that, and so because of that, I think I had already put the pressure on myself to help that person solve their performance ecosystem prior to ever working with these guys who are headed for the Hall of Fame. And so because of that, I think I was prepared to just carry on my approach that I had always believed in.
Tim, this question may kind of be all over the place, but I think from the outside looking in, you see that these players play 82 games. You see them 4 or 5 days a week, sweating on the court, playing 30-plus minutes a game, and you wonder, where do they have time to train and travel? How do they fit this all in? And it seemed like you were kind of going there with, I would assume, you said you coached everyone like they were Kobe Bryant. And I would assume that everyone had a very individualized approach and specific workouts tailored to them. How do you go about, not just the whole team, but even down to the individual, with 82 games, fitting all this in? What's kind of a day in the life of coaching them look like to get them to work out, to get them healthy for a game? I mean, it just seems like the schedule has got to be packed.
It's outrageous. I mean, it's I'm sitting there as the season's going on, and I mean, when you get down to it, essentially I'm just handing these guys dumbbells, and they're out there doing all this stuff and playing 30, 40 minutes, and I'm exhausted. I mean, I'm waking up peeling myself out of bed, and I sure as heck didn't play 35 minutes or play a game that went into overtime and in a different time zone the night before. So, yeah, what you're talking about is a real thing, and it's something that if you, until you've experienced it firsthand. I've been an NBA fan my whole entire life, as far back as I can remember. I thought I knew what the deal was. I get 2 weeks into my job here, and I realized I had no idea what the deal was when it comes to the travel, the grind of it all. And so, yeah, it's a real thing. What you're referring to, it's something that every player, every staff person has to figure out how they're going to handle and stand up to the grind. So, sort of getting into another part of your question, what that means is if you think a person in my position is going to sit down and write a program for a month or a season or an off season, even and have months worth of training patterned and programmed out, you're out of your mind. You can have a guide and an idea of where you need to head and what you need to accomplish, but there's curveballs around every corner, and you wake up basically every day and it's a new, it's a whole new, it's like, you're starting from scratch in some cases. And so you better be able to sit back and hit that curveball if you're gonna be able to last and to excel, not only in my position but as a player. And so yeah, it's a constant reevaluation. It's a daily sort of dialogue that you're having with each individual player, which is getting into another part of your question. There's no way that I could just put together a program and say this is going to be what 15 guys on the roster do this season or today, for that matter, and that would just not solve those ecosystem problems that performance ecosystem problems that each individual has, which are all different. So yeah, it's I think what the way around that is I have to be extremely flexible. I think strength coaches in general tend to want to be and tend to be pretty regimented, pretty good at planning and programming and having things all laid out to here's what we're going to do. That doesn't cut it in this. That's not going to work in this specific environment. Doesn't mean you just randomly waking up and throwing a dart at the wall, but it requires flexibility to be a little bit less structured in planning, months in advance in what you're doing. That piece is key, and then the second piece is you've got to be able to communicate, have a relationship, develop a relationship, and connect with each individual player, because the best and the only way that you can really get information on your plate and on your table as far as, well, what is our next step going to be, is to hear from the player what they're going through, how they're feeling, what they're dealing with, physically, emotionally, whatever it might be. All those things are going to change your next move. And so that constant dialogue with the players is absolutely the foundation of what I do.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like, so we have a friend who's a personal trainer, and he only has maybe a handful of clients. But what he'll do, he actually goes to their home, and he really just dives in to those relationships, right? And they pay him a crazy rate for it because of it, and he's so good at it. But what he'll do, he doesn't write a program in advance at all. He just shows up, watches how they're moving, and then he's going to take them through a workout based on that. But he knows what they've done before. You know, he knows what they're going to be doing, kind of, you know, overarching anyway. So it's kind of a bit like that as well, you're saying. I mean, it's not like you're going at it blindly. You know that they played these 35 minutes, you know that they, et cetera, but it's a daily thing.
Well, it's a great point. Essentially, what I'm talking about is that method and that approach to training and helping somebody solve their performance ecosystem hurdles or log jams has to be applied at every single level. And that's not like a new thing that I just started doing when I got to work the Lakers.
Right.
And if you look at all the great expert clinicians that are out there and strength coaches and everything in between, that's a common denominator. None of them overlook that step.
Yeah. Well, let's get into a little bit of how you train these guys. What's your training philosophy?
Yeah. So the deal is I have to prepare these guys to have robust enough musculoskeletal systems to withstand the rigors of that crazy grind that we just discussed. And basketball specifically has a high impact, high octane, high power, explosive based sport. So there's very little shock absorption and added equipment or padding to take any of the load of that. So it's not about me putting an extra 5 inches vertical leap on a guy who can already jump halfway out the gym. It's about me making sure that he's physically capable of stepping on the court night in, night out, withstand those loads, go to bed and do it again. And so they're super skilled at what they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it this far in their sport. It's my job to make sure that they can go do their skill. And so my experience and my knowledge of the overall training and strength and conditioning core principles that exist always lead me back to this idea that in order to do that, you have to move efficiently. You have to have some semblance of movement literacy without excessive asymmetry. And you have to then progressively and responsibly add resistance stimulus to the structures of not just the muscles, but the support structures of the musculoskeletal system in order for them to respond and grow in strength and ability to endure high competitive loads. So there's kind of move right and move/lift heavy things is how you could describe that part of my philosophies. Now, in order to get more granular than that, we've got to realize the population of people we're working with. We're working with a bunch of really tall, lean guys, for the most part, who have very little weight room experience and skills. And even by the time they get to the NBA, oftentimes basketball players at the pro level have done a lot of playing basketball and not a lot of skilled weight room in the trenches time. And it's just the culture of the game. It's the nature of the game. There's never an off season anymore. Every player is just playing pickup or playing some summer league basketball, and then the season starts and you play all season long, and you could throw the discussion about AAU into the mix where a kid gets done with a 20-game high school season and they go into a 40-game AAU season. So because of that, I'm really starting from scratch with these guys, teaching them how to move and teaching them how to lift heavy things the right way. And it's my job to progressively overload those structures in a responsible way where they are getting the stimulus they need to have the support structures, the tendons, the ligaments, and the bones, probably much more important than actual response of the muscles and hypertrophy to some extent, because those support structures are what's going to carry them throughout an entire NBA season. So boiling that all down, I mean, it looks like some pretty basic stuff when you walk into my weight room. Guys are learning lunge patterns. They're starting on the floor, learning how to use their core to move their limbs better. They're learning squats and deadlift hip hinge patterns, and learning the correct way to do push-ups, engaging your glutes, engaging your core. I mean, it's not like I'm over here inventing exercises and trying to create YouTube sensations with guys just because they have a crazy amount of athleticism. That's quite the opposite.
And Tim, you actually led me into my next question there, which was going to be, how do you find the balance, especially with a busy schedule like this for everyone involved? How do you find the balance between correcting their movement and getting them stronger? And I know some of that overlaps, but do you have them go through a session where it's primarily focused on movement, and then you have a session that's devoted, okay, we worked on your movement, now we're going to get stronger, and you just kind of build and build and build upon that?
It's a tough one. I mean, that's part of this puzzle.
Because what I'm thinking is I would assume it's very difficult to have a guy working on his squat pattern or lunge pattern, and then at the same time you want to place him under some load to, like you said, build up that structure.
Yeah, you can't. Right. I mean, you can't just the next month we're going to learn the squat pattern and just do a bunch of, whether you like it or like the term or not, a bunch of corrective based exercises. That's ignoring the progressive resistance loading that the structures need to be able to be strong enough once they do move better. So if you get them moving better, but you haven't been loading the structures, that's not going to completely prepare them. So yeah, I mean, I think that if you talk to any movement skilled clinician in terms of assessing and quantifying, improving movement, they'd all tell you that if you're going to wait until it's all perfect, you're going to be in trouble. So it's like, okay, I need to be able to see we have a certain semblance of requisite movement literacy and quality, then we can move directly into loading. Now, there's typically a way always around being able to, okay, we haven't hit that requisite level yet, but we're getting close, and there's other ways to not exacerbate a poor movement pattern while still loading certain structures. So that could be something like if a guy's hasn't quite learned a really, really solid hip hinge pattern to where they can keep everything on point from neck all the way down to feet if I loaded them up with a bar in front of them. But we can develop some of those hip hinge structures and support structures that are involved in the hip hinge by doing a hip thrust or a bench bridge. They're not having to stand up necessarily and train in a default pattern or position before they're ready, but they're learning that hip hinge with a dumbbell or barbell on their hips. Their back is propped on a bench, and they're learning the action of the hip hinge starting to load the structures.
So I know you're an NSCA guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
I went through mine, got my CSCS just this past year as well, and I know they really like the sports specific training aspect. I know they teach that, and I've heard some other things, read some other deals that a lot of people, quite frankly, think it's kind of quackery. They think that there should just be, like you're saying, just some foundational functional movements that you can train, and that's going to equate to athleticism basically no matter what sport or anything you're playing.
Yeah.
So kind of just take me through your thoughts on sports-specific training, and if that's something that you adhere to.
Right. I think that the term of sports specificity and sports-specific based training, it does get overblown.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a fundamental set of movements and strength qualities that every athlete needs across that just overlaps all sports. And, a great example is, well, would a bowler need to do sprints? Why, how is that sport specific? Well, I mean, I don't know a lot about bowling, but they do have a moment where they have to produce a high level of power, get the ball heading towards the pins with enough velocity to make them all not fall down.
Right.
So you could argue that doing sprints once to twice a week for a bowler is sport specific, because sprinting is going to help them develop that moment of power that they need when they release the ball. There's also a deceleratory moment when they release the ball in bowling, where having to decelerate from sprints could absolutely apply to training that sport-specific skill. So that's a wacky kind of analogy that is a little bit extreme. But I mean, if you wanted to, we could argue why that is why that applies. And so I think that for me, I of course there's with basketball players being as tall as they are, and different sports have certain qualities and requisites that are more specific to that sport than you might not find in another sport, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the ability to to squat, to lunge, to hip hinge, and to move loads in certain patterns, it's pretty easy to argue where they all are sport specific to every sport.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I like that.
Tim, I'd like to dig into a little bit on the strength training aspect. I know you mentioned earlier, having these tall athletes, having these strong structures. And I read an article recently where it was about sports specificity. And you mentioned it with the AAU thing and kids just playing all the time and growing up, and they kind of lack this bone density, right? They don't have the strength in their bones and their joints and tendons and ligaments. And I don't think it's not just for athletes, but even like just our listeners out there, there seems to be this, I don't know if it's changed, it doesn't seem to have changed, but this long-term misconception that somehow doing strength work is going to damage our bones or joints, and people are kind of afraid of it, And it's one of those things, finding balance in life. I think yoga's great. I enjoy it, but I think I also love to heavy front squat or be under a barbell. I think finding balance in life, not just for these athletes, but in life, could you touch on the massive benefits of training heavy or somewhat heavy?
Yeah. This is something where our industry, I'm actually presenting essentially on what you're talking about at the NBSCA, National Basketball Strength and Conditioning Association Continuing Education Conference in a few weeks on this idea of what is it that makes these support structures. You mentioned bones specifically. I would throw ligaments and tendons in there. What is it specifically that makes them more robust? Because those are what allow us to go out on a daily basis and be an athlete, which, by the way, a human is an athlete, and athletes are humans. So everything I'm talking about here, it doesn't just apply to the Lakers roster. It applies to as long as your listeners are all humans, they're all athletes. And so I think in our industry, we've done what we typically do is overreact in the short run and underreact in the long run, get excited about a new idea, a new method of doing things, and arguably overreact to it. This idea of using different stimuli, bands, and lots of balance apparatuses and different modes of working out or breaking a sweat or challenging the human body, none of them are bad, and all of them have a place. The problem is you can't just disregard the tried and true aspect of getting under the bar, moving heavy weight, and the stimulus that provides to the bones, to the ligaments, to the tendons. You can't get rid of that. I mean, that is ultimately what is going to allow them to react and respond. And we just don't think of those structures. We think of those structures as we don't think of them as reactive structures that they can react to a stimulus the same way. We all know if you work a muscle, it'll get bigger. It'll react to that stimulus. We don't think of those sort of static structures as being able to do that, but they absolutely do. And so, yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that everybody has to be able to go show up at a deadlift competition and a powerlifting competition and do what it takes to compete at that. But it definitely does mean that doing some semblance of progressive resistance training exercise is absolutely critical to that musculoskeletal system and all the support structures that go along with it. And I think that as an industry, we may be overlooking that the necessity of that to some extent.
So yeah, you mentioned there's some, the industry kind of tends to overreact in the short term and then kind of underact in the long term. Are there any other areas that kind of come to mind that you think the strength and conditioning industry is failing athletes?
Yeah, I think that we're in this no man's land right now with monitoring, loads, technology, wearable devices. We're like a newborn baby who's laying on their back looking up at the carousel, and they're just mesmerized by all the different shapes, bells, and whistles. And we don't know what the hell we're looking at, and we don't know why it looks cool or what it's going to do for us in a lot of cases. So we're in that state of being mesmerized by what's out there, maybe getting away from some of the bigger, more important things, like teaching somebody how to cook or what it means to be properly hydrated, or just knowing how to navigate, walk through a grocery store, or navigate, walk through, and do a great job in the weight room. I mean, before we start putting all these things and gadgets and technology pieces onto our athletes, have you covered those areas? Because if you haven't, then we can't afford to skip over that. it's our responsibility. It's our job to make sure every athlete is covered in those fundamental areas. And have you had a discussion with your client or with your athlete about what it means to have a high level of sleep hygiene and quality? Or did you just say, well, there's a cool new gadget that you can wear on your wrist and it'll tell us how you sleep? Because that gadget is not going to help them sleep better. Your ability to coach them and to guide them in that in those fundamental things, like let's get the TV out of your bedroom. I mean, that's going to be a lot more valuable than putting a thing on their wrist and seeing how many times they move their wrist around when they slept. I don't want to sound like I'm against technology and the evolution of the where you're merging technology with the sports performance ecosystem, because it's absolutely necessary and it's fascinating and it's happening at a rate that's faster than anybody could imagine. But we need to make sure we're not losing sight of these fundamentals and failing our athletes in that way.
Tim, let's shift gears a little bit, and you started to bring it up there, but let's focus on the nutrition aspect. That's a whole nother part of your job that I know you're very passionate about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but has earned you the nickname Grass-Fed Tim.
Yes.
So
yes. Thanks to Meta World Peace, formerly Ron Artest. He might be Panda's friend now. I don't know what his name is, but whatever his name is, he stuck that name on me, and I haven't ever lived it down.
Leave it up to Ron Artest to come up with a nickname, right?
Absolutely. One of my favorites right there.
So is there a specific nutrition or like dietary protocol that you follow or recommend for kind of your general athletes or population?
Yeah, so I think that my fascination and my passion with why I ended up earning that nickname from Meta and why I'm always talking about the foods and the approach to eating being important is it goes back to, as far as I can figure out, I can remember my mom and my aunt cooking dinner. I was doing something in the kitchen or in the other room, but I could hear their conversation. They were talking about how every time they eat kale, they just feel better. And they feel like they have a better day the next day at what they're doing. And so for some reason that stuck with me. And that was, let me remind you, that was before kale became the thing that it is right now, where it's like, kale is in our brownies now and stuff. So,
it's a side of Chick-fil-A, Tim.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So that was before kale was as we know it. And so my mom and aunt were onto something way before. They were way ahead of their time. And that was, I don't know, that stuck with me. It's like, holy crap. There's really a link between what we're putting in and what we're getting out. And there really is. And that was just really intriguing to me. And so in terms of a specific approach for us, we work with who I consider to be the best metabolic nutrition expert and translating nutrition into performance expert in the world, which is Dr. Kate Shanahan. And Dr. Kate is she's a medical doctor who really has this understanding of the fundamental processes, biology and physiology of the human body and how the nutrients we provide impact that, and then how you translate that into high performance. So we've worked with Dr. Kate for 4+ years now, and I think if you boil down what our approach is and what Dr. Kate has helped us to understand as really important areas, we're talking about getting guys to recognize where some of the really sneaky and just debilitating evils lie in some of the foods. So for us, that's a matter of educating guys on just how much sugar, added, refined, excess sugar that you're taking in and what that does to the support structures. So if we just go back to those structures, we all agree are really important in a person being able to perform at a high level at anything. Those tendons, those ligaments, and those bones, they basically just get more brittle the more you douse them with excess sugar. And so it's obviously a bit more complicated than that, but I think that's where we just need to understand ultimately what's going on. And additionally, these oils, these oils that are in just about everything that we eat, we're talking canola, corn, soy, cottonseed oil, those are vegetable oil. Those are some of the terms and the big ones that are just in practically everything. Those things are just creating this low level amount of inflammation in our body, which over the course of a day or a week is no big deal. But over the course of an athletic career or a 30-year lifetime, it becomes a big deal on if we're just talking about those support structures even. And it goes further than that. It goes into the cardiovascular system and those structures that are involved with that system as well, but different topic for a different day. So really getting guys to recognize those things and where they live and where they exist and how they can avoid them. Then understanding how to be more flexible in your fuel systems. So there's two things the body can burn for fuel: fat or sugar. If you talk to any person, they all want to basically burn some fat and gain a little muscle, and in some way, shape, or form. And so if everybody is looking to burn some fat and then we need to evaluate what we're telling our athletes, which is typically the line that I grew up being taught to guide athletes in is athletes need to carbo load. And so are we paleo? Are we no carb? Are we low carb? Are we, completely ketogenic diet, all these things? No, we're not. That's not what we're doing. None of those exact systems fit perfectly into our environment. But some pieces of all of them do, for sure. And so you've got to be able to, as an athlete, be flexible in your fuel system utilization, meaning are you skilled? Is your body prepared to burn fat when it should and when it needs to? Because that's typically a more efficient fuel source in the long term. And is it capable of flipping over and burning sugar stores when it needs to tap into that? Maybe it needs that during short burst activities or whatever it might be. So if you're just going to constantly carbo load, it's like the analogy would be you're looking for a strong back and set of shoulders, but all you do is bench press. If you're not doing any rows in your training, how are you going to get a strong back by doing all push exercises? So same thing with the fuel source utilization. I mean, you have to consume healthy fats in order to teach your body how to burn them. So that's another piece of what we're doing. I think underlying all of this, though, is a perfect example of when I take a guy to a grocery store and say, here's where we're going to start, is in that produce section. So the idea of food being medicine and starting in that produce section of colorful green leafy vegetables and fruits that can really help to improve your tissue repair capabilities is it can't be overlooked. And so for some guys it's like TD, I mean, I don't know. I once ate a piece of broccoli because my mom and dad made me, but since then I wouldn't even know what the stuff looks like. So it's like, okay, well, where can we start? I mean, it's a matter of finding, maybe for that person, if you were to figure out, putting a couple of pieces of kale into a strawberry banana smoothie, without adding all kinds of extra sugars and sweeteners, maybe that's something that person would start with. But for some people, it's like, yeah, I enjoy a good salad, but I mean, I don't really like to eat them too often because it's just like a little lemon and olive oil and some tomatoes and carrots on my lettuce is boring. It's like, well, look, man, I want you to put some healthy cheese on there. Let's find some almonds or some nuts that pack a punch for you as well. And maybe we could put some grilled shrimp on there and some other things that well, hey, if you want to cook some healthy, well-sourced bacon and crumble it up on there, that we're all for that, because you need those healthy fats to be able to sustain and support the athletic and human body in general. And so yeah, I better stop myself here because I can get going for a while here on this topic.
No, that's great. And I mean, Jake and I did a podcast, just the two of us, a while back that was focused on longevity and eating for performance, and we dove into a couple different diets, but primarily focusing more on low carb. So if anyone's kind of new to the podcast, we'll put that in the show notes. People can flip back and listen to that episode on kind of the macros and what ketogenic means and some of those details that Tim's touching on here. But all great points, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to, we're not saying no carb or even low carb. We're saying let's be carb aware. I think that's an important thing, is because every single person is a little bit different in how sensitive and how much they need, how much overall dosage of carbohydrate that they need to function at the level they want to function. And it goes into genetics. It goes into your eating history of your lifetime. It goes into all these different things play a role in that. For me to say, well, we want all our guys to be under 200 grams of carbs per day is ridiculous. There might be some guys that perform their best when that is the case. There might be guys that don't. And so it's a matter of being carb aware and recognizing where your sweet spot is.
Yeah, that reminds me, anytime we get asked what's our nutritional philosophy, I basically just tell people that we recommend just using carbs as a tool, basically. That's what they're meant to do. But I do want to ask, is this something that changes like on a daily basis? Like, are athletes' macros changing daily, or are their training, does it look different based on what they're eating that day? I mean, how do you have them become more metabolically, flexible, like you're talking?
Yeah, it's so stepping back. Just let me bring everybody into like the trenches of what it is when you walk into the facility on a Tuesday morning, and we just came off of a back-to-back. I mean, sure. Guys are exhausted. They might be pissed off because they didn't get the minutes they wanted, or because we lost, or whatever it might be. They might have suffered an injury. They might have had a argument with their wife before they left the house about who's going to drop the kid off at daycare. I mean, so just wanting to anchor us to the idea that the human beings behind the jerseys are what we're dealing with. So sometimes the last thing they want to hear is me going and telling them how much of an omelet and how much yogurt they should have on their plate. Get the hell out of here, man. Yeah. I don't want to hear that shit right now. And so it's less of an exact science and like this picture perfect, nice, neat little box that we have for each guy. It's more of a read and react type scenario on a daily basis. Now, that being said, I usually find that we have a breakdown in the locker room of every roster I've been around that's like 30, 30, 30, and 10 split. So 30% of the guys in the locker room are all in. They're these early adapters, early reactors that society has outside of a pro locker room, and they're like, yeah, this is new, this is different. I've had trouble navigating the nutrition landscape and figure out what macros I should be hitting, and it's been really confusing to me. But what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I'm all in. Let's go. So they're peeling back every layer to the onion. They're like, tell me more, get me, I want to check in with you every morning. I want you to help me figure this out. There's another 30% that are like, all right, you got my attention. I'll maybe you're right. Maybe I should cut back the amount of, whatever it is, Snicker bars or whatever. And maybe I should think about how I can get a good salad in every day if it's one that you can help me put together that tastes really good. You've got another 30% who just they'll just dangle their toes in the water a little bit. It's like, all right, I'm gonna show up at the buffets, assuming you're gonna put mostly really highly sourced foods and there's gonna be good choices for me to make. Then I'm happy to make those choices. But I other than that, leave me alone. And so then there's 10% who don't give a shit. And so, that's the truth. That's if you and sometimes there's more than 10%, but that's how it works. And so you've got to, I've always got to be able to provide everything I can to that first 30% that are all in. And then I can't just ignore the other 70% though. And so I have to make sure that I'm covering bases for all of them. And a lot of times what that means is, hey guys, the buffet, we're not stripping pancakes and waffles or mac and cheese from the buffet. This isn't a dictatorship. It's gonna be there. But at the very least, I'm going to educate you guys on, if you want to be more capable of and flexible in your fuel utilization and be careful of making sure you're eating for promoting tissue repair and tissue healing, then you want to make less of those types of choices. And so that's really our method of doing that. It's not about like every guy has like a piece of paper on their chair in the morning and says, this is what you should eat today in order to be successful.
Tim, what's the player in your time with the Lakers so far that has been the most dialed in, either from beginning when you started there to now, or even maybe a guy that y'all just picked up for a year? Who was the player that was most dialed in on his nutrition?
Nash, Steve Nash, for sure. Ryan Kelly currently is exceptional with it, and Chris Kaman, when we had Chris, did an absolutely phenomenal job and carried it on to he went to Portland, the Trailblazers after us, and those guys I think for me really stand out in being these all-in guys. Like I absolutely see the link between what I eat and how I perform, and I think, frankly, it was solving a pain point for them. Like, they've gone through their entire professional career with everywhere they went, it was a different quote-unquote nutrition expert who was telling them a different set of rules. And that's a pain point that every single one of us, I don't care what, where you're at, if you have the internet, you go on and you see the Yahoo ticker change with a new, set of research or a new article that says, bringing up our favorite, as we discussed, kale. I mean, there's like, now you're seeing articles, could kale be bad for us? Right? And so it's like, it went from the holy grail of nutrition to maybe if it's not prepared right, or if it's not from the right soil base, or if you eat too much of it and so on and so forth, like, could it be bad for us? Like, give me a break, would you? I mean, what the hell is the deal here? So I think that a lot of players have that same pain point that everybody has when it comes to navigating the nutrition landscape. It's overwhelming, it's exhausting, and it's just, everybody is putting opinions out there without putting, evidence and in the trenches based feedback out there. And so it can be really challenging. But those three guys are really dialed in when it comes to that.
And it's interesting because you'd think these guys are so well known for this competitive mentality that they have. I know sports psychologists love studying pro athletes, but you're saying that doesn't always translate to every area of their life. Is that right?
Yeah. When I first got to the Lakers, very first home game, walk into the players' lounge area, which is connected to the locker room, and so let's say there's 2 hours before game time. There's a spread on the table of arena popcorn. And within an hour of me being there, I've got 4 players who are handing $20 to $40 to ball boys, having them run to get chicken fingers, French fries, mini deep dish pizzas, and even Big Macs.
Wow.
And so this is something that I think every pro locker room is faced with, is those guys got there oftentimes not making every decision the best way that they could. And they were able to get away with stuff because of skill sets, genetics, other areas of work ethic as well that helped them to overshadow other smaller bad decisions. So they figure, well, geez, I made it to the NBA. I used to stop at Burger King before every game and get a Whopper and an orange soda, and I did pretty damn good getting there this far, and so you're up against that. I mean, that it's hard to even argue that sometimes. Like, how are you supposed to, and my response is absolutely. I mean, no question about it. You've done that. That I can't argue that, but I just want you to be aware that eventually that ability to overcome some of those smaller micro poor decisions, they'll add up, and they're just going into an account right now. Eventually that account is going to grow, and growing that account is not a good thing. And it'll catch up to you in some way. Maybe it's decreased energy. Maybe it's an injury. Maybe it's your ability to focus is impaired. Whatever it might be. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys. Look at our roster right now. We've got a slew of 19 to 24-year-olds. I mean, I wasn't making great decisions around every corner when I was 19 or 24. I mean. My wife would tell you maybe I'm still not making great decisions around every corner, but I mean, it's the fact of the matter is when that's all the case, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to cover. Just bringing it back to another part of our conversation, I think it's really being able to recognize the big rocks in the discussion. So for me to immediately get on a guy who is having a Big Mac on game day, who also hasn't been taught the skills of the weight room, doesn't understand regular hydration, doesn't understand sleep. I mean, is the Big Mac really the biggest issue here? Or can I solve a lot more problems just by going to his apartment and saying, okay, first of all, we need some blackout curtains in here. We need to get you a stack of earplugs if the dude next door is banging his music all night. And we need to drop the temperature down to a more reasonable sleeping temperature for your body. I mean, I could probably accomplish a lot more, and then we'll worry about the Big Macs later.
Tim, what's some of the latest technology that you are a fan of that you guys are using to help athletes either recover or just rehab from just a game, just even if it's not an injury or anything like that? some things that come to mind are the cryotherapy. Are you looking at blood work very often? I saw an article with you and Gary Vitti with the 3D scanner. You guys got out from Germany over at the facility,
right?
And so, just what are some things that you're using that you do like and that you see working?
Yeah, so it's an evolving area. It's so, I mentioned before, it's changing so drastically that a piece of technology that we looked at 3 months ago, it could be obsolete by now, and so. But to answer your question, in terms of specifically, we certainly enjoy and utilize the Normatec units, air compression systems that we use on airplanes, and we use in the training room, post workout, post activity to create just a circulation and a better environment for tissue repair and recovery of especially the lower body. But they have units that apply to upper body extremities as well. And so that's one of the things. We're in the midst of building a brand new practice facility. So there's going to be a cryotherapy chamber that we will utilize in there.
Do you currently use any like cold and hot pools or contrast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right now? Okay.
So hot, cold, contrast tubs and post workout cold tub therapy, absolutely. So that's definitely a big piece of it. I think just scaling back a little bit though is this idea of the culture that you're setting in your locker room and across your roster of valuing recovery strategies is really important. So we offer these different recovery strategies, and then we keep track of how often guys are doing them. We'll put that on paper, and we can actually see where guys stack up in terms of basically how much focus and effort they're putting into their recovery strategies, and it becomes like a scoreboard where if a guy's up here accumulated 40 sessions after the first month of recovery strategies, and there's a guy who's got 2, then we need to do a better job of educating that guy as far as why these things are important. But then getting back into we've also trialed and utilized to some extent for our ability to get a deeper insight into what's going on in their body from a fatigue, overtraining, and recovery quality standpoint is Massimo, a company called Massimo, has an O2 saturation monitor that can just be applied to the finger and will tell us information about pulse rate, oxygen saturation levels, both at rest and during activity. And just like everything else, I mean, for me to sit here and say like that's our secret weapon is ridiculous. But it's a tool within our toolbox that allows us to potentially gain some valuable insight into what's going on with them and see trends within an individual and see where we might be able to react and help prevent something versus finding out when it's too late.
And is that tool available for the general public? Does that hook up to a computer or to an app or? Yeah. So it is. It's a Bluetooth capable device, and off of the Massimo website, anybody would be able to purchase that at a relatively quite a reasonable price. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes for everyone.
Yeah.
We did get to try those Normatec boots one time, and God, they were awesome.
Those are incredible. We're waiting to snag a pair of those for sure.
Yeah, if you got any you're not using, or are too small for those guys or something,
send them over, right?
Yeah.
It's a really nice tool for us. Our athletic training staff and rehab staff in particular, they are up and down out of their seats all flight long on many of our flights, changing them and moving them from one guy to the next, because there's just so few windows for us to be able to promote recovery with these guys, and that's one way that we certainly are able to do that.
We're also pretty big fans of the ice bath and the contrast baths. How often do you recommend?
Yeah.
How often are your athletes doing that?
Right. This is a good point, because let's take a guy, for instance, that is hates and has not been desensitized to the cold water. So the temperatures that you need to hit, whatever it might be, say somewhere between 50 60 degrees in that cold tub, are extremely. It's like, it's like you're putting that person into a vat of poison. I mean, it's that. It's just something that that is not enjoyable to them, and they just haven't spent time doing cold baths and that kind of thing. So take a player who that is the case, and the goal of the recovery being to promote recovery, right? And so instead you're triggering a flight reaction of within the body to this stimulus that is extremely unenjoyable to them. So with that person, it's a matter of what are we doing here? I mean, are we actually promoting recovery, or are we creating stress on the individual? And it's a matter of usually taking time to take that person through warmer temperatures down slowly into colder temperatures, getting them desensitized and used to that environment. But to answer your question, it depends on the person. It depends on, there's plenty of information out there to say, like, you probably can overdo the amount of time and frequency that you spend in cold tubs, depending on what your goals are.
Right.
So, like, if you're a professional weightlifter, you're probably not benefiting as much from a daily cold tub after a workout as potentially an NBA guy is. Another interesting thing is in the off season. So in season to off season, off season is your great chance to get this training stimulus. And so if you're constantly finding ways to dampen that, and to even if they are these high quality recovery strategies, you may be dampening the training stimulus that you're trying to get in the off season. So, if it's the off season, we're going to be promoting that. You almost want to hit that overreaching state in the off season much more certainly than you do during the season. So, probably during the season, we're not really promoting that as much as we are just trying to make sure a guy's ready for the second back-to-back of a 10-day stretch.
Yeah. Someone's saying it's too much of a good thing,
Yeah,
everything's on a bell curve.
Nobody wants to hear this, but like most things in this industry, it depends.
Right. Yeah. Just like everything in life, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah. Well, tell us a little bit more about the TD Athletes Edge. Yeah,
so that's a platform that the website for that is www.tdathletesedge.com, and that really is the baby of what I talk about, my story of having to solve my own performance ecosystem problems and loving the process of that. That's really what came out of that is TD Athletes Edge is my platform to be able to help others of every level be able to solve that performance ecosystem and optimize it. And so currently we utilize our blog to get our ideas and our set of philosophies out so that people can benefit from that on a regular basis. I'm also very active on Twitter and Instagram at TD Athletes Edge, and Facebook as well. We have a YouTube channel that you can just search on YouTube, TD Athletes Edge. And I try to put information up there that hits across the entire ecosystem of performance. So it's not just focused on what to do in the weight room. It's not just focused on what to do in the kitchen, but everything and all in between. And so that's really my platform, to be able to solve those problems. And that's again what my passion drive comes from. So yeah, we love more. We love to have people visiting and collaborating with us. And I use a hashtag oftentimes on social media is TDAE together, TD Athletes Edge together. And my point is, everybody has different areas where they need help and coaching and guidance, and including myself. And so the bigger the community, the greater the togetherness of that, the more support you have in solving those problems. And that's what we're about.
And Tim, I know you have kind of a new project launching soon, which is your webinar in the near future. Could you give people a little background and what they can look forward to for those that want to sign up for that?
Yeah, so that is I'm really excited about this, because I know for me, navigating a career in sports medicine / rehab / physical therapy / strength and conditioning and performance, there's no cookie cutter recipe that is like, well, these are the things you do to get to where you want to be and be successful and really enjoy this industry that so many people have a passion for. And so with this webinar that we're going to do this summer, and you can get more details on this on our website right on the homepage, www.tdathletesedge.com. It's really about me sharing my experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, with what I've gone through at this point. I would honestly admit, or relatively early in my professional career, but within that early part of my career, I've experienced a fair amount at different levels, and so I'm excited to be able to share my experiences, to be able to help people to navigate that career path within this industry, and really get the most out of your career in this industry, whatever it is that is your career Super Bowl, as I want to call it. And I think that's really important. It's important for you as an individual to hear those experiences. I know I did. I benefited from being a fly on the wall and from picking people's brains and being a part of listening to experts and people who had really figured a lot of it out. And so I want to be able to relay that back and pay it back for anybody who is faced with that same set of circumstances.
Well, maybe just as a little bit of a teaser for that webinar, what would be maybe your parting advice here on people looking to get into the strength and conditioning realm?
That's yeah. So I think the biggest thing is understanding the overall landscape, all the different areas of where you can go, and when you take a sort of treetop down look at what that is, it's extremely vast. There's so many different avenues that you can go, from the rehab area to the performance area to the acute response and more athletic training based avenues and everything all in between that. So understanding what the landscape looks like, then finding where you believe your Super Bowl is. Where within that is your Super Bowl? There's no right answer to that, but there's some ways that you can really break down and force yourself to think about where your Super Bowl is within all of that. I also think one other piece is something we're going to talk a lot about is the different strategies you can use to develop relationships with the human beings behind the jerseys or the workout clothes or the whatever it is, the people on the treatment tables, whatever it is, in whatever area you're looking for, the ways that you can really reach deeply and connect with the people that you're working with and that you're guiding is the foundation of it all. So we're going to get into that and a lot more along the areas of things that I've experienced in the buffet of sports rehab, medicine, performance, and strength and conditioning.
Oh, sounds great. Sounds really nice for any of those listeners looking to kind of get into that field.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have anyone who's interested in joining us for that.
Tim, I know we're closing here, but I feel like we'd be doing a disservice to our listeners if we didn't ask one question about how people can jump higher. So if there's one aspect in the gym that is kind of my forte, I don't have many of them, but it is jumping, and I get it asked a lot. And so what's something out there, whether it's one exercise, three, what's the takeaway for people that want to jump higher?
Okay, so the takeaway is you've got to have, you have to understand where the power is going to be generated from. Should you ignore and never do heel raises? Absolutely not. You need to strengthen and add progressive resistance to the calf and Achilles complex of surrounding the ankle and the knee. But true power, vertical, explosive development comes from the hips. They need to move well, and they need to be strong and trained for power. So a quick, easy way to do that is to assuming your hip mobility is of a reasonable level, is to pair hip strengthening and hip building exercises such as squat, deadlift, hip thrust, and lunges. Pair those with a plyometric type exercise. So again, this is all assuming that this isn't going to be the first time that you've ever tried a plyometric based activity and you haven't left the ground in the last 20 years. Right. So there's a workup that goes into what I'm discussing here, but
disclaimer.
Exactly. So pairing those plyometric based, even if we're just talking something as simple as a broad jump or a box jump floor to box, pairing that with, say, a front squat or a goblet squat, pairing a broad jump with a rack pull or a hex bar deadlift can really get sort of that. It can help your musculoskeletal system, your neuromuscular system, to really translate the strength developing nature of the strength exercise into the power and explosiveness based action of getting up and jumping. And so there's a quick one for you that most people can probably start to incorporate responsibly as soon as they want to.
And when you say pair, you would mean something like, just for example, 4 sets of 8 of like a hex bar deadlift or back squat, and immediately go into, say, some like 5 box jumps, and then a little recovery period, and then another set.
You got it.
Awesome.
Dang. So if you made it this far into this podcast with us, you will now be able to dunk a basketball in no time.
You said it, not me.
All right, Tim. Well, yeah, we'll link to the website, all your social media stuff. We'll put the webinar and everything in the show notes. Go follow this guy. Connect with him out there. You won't regret it. So thanks, Tim. This has been awesome, man.
Yeah,
Guys,
thanks for coming on.
So much, and I appreciate the opportunity, and you guys are doing great things as well. So keep up your good work, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Absolutely. You got it, man. All right, guys. Till next time.
Thanks, Tim.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the 2Fit Podcast. This episode is brought to you by 2Fit USA, the sports nutrition company owned and operated by the 2Fit guys. To show our appreciation for you tuning into the podcast, we would like to give you a 10% off your entire order at 2fitusa.com. All of our products are sugar-free, paleo-friendly, gluten-free, non-GMO, and a whole list of other buzzwords. So hop on over to 2fitusa.com. Don't forget to use your promo code FIT1, that's FIT1 at checkout. We highly value and appreciate your feedback, so please leave a review about the products and the podcast at our website, 2fitusa.com, under the podcast and products pages. You can also leave a review on iTunes. Now, if we happen to read your review during one of our podcasts, you'll receive a 1-month free subscription of all 2Fit products. So write something noteworthy. If not, we probably won't read it anyway. So go leave a review, listen to the next episode, and till next time.